and intercut it with 3 different objects: a bowl of hot soup, a distraught woman draped across her husband's coffin, and a little girl playing with a teddy bear. When audiences saw the film, they raved about the actor's performance. How hungrily he looked at the soup. How sorrowfully he gazed at the woman. And how tenderly he watched the little girl.
But actually, it was the same expression each time. Now, this demonstrates the power of juxtaposition, the power of montage, by taking one shot and another shot to give it a third meaning. And the third meaning is an effect, an emotion that's much greater than the sum total of the 2 parts that put it together in the first place. And this is the basis of all editing, by the way.
One of Kuleshov's contemporaries, Sergei Eisenstein, combined these experiments with Marxist ideology to create films of revolutionary fervor. He saw editing like history, as a clash of images and ideas. The meaning of the film was not in the shots themselves, but in their collision. When 2 elements are in conflict, he argued, their collision sparks a new meaning of higher order. Where Griffith tried to hide his cuts, Eisenstein reveled in them. He wanted the audience to feel the frame, to know that this is a movie, not life.
Eisenstein is the first real director. He killed himself in his staging, and he killed himself with his camera work and everything, but it was all at the service of the scissors. Every little single solitary bit of it.
I got a movie projector when I was like 11, and one of the first movies I got was Battleship Potemkin. I just ran that Odessa step sequence over and over again. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. One of the things that makes it incredible is the editing, the incredible juxtaposition of images. What the Russians did was a response to what Griffith had done, classical editing and now Eisensteinian montage. Then you can take that further. The American cinema has absorbed all of that stuff from the Russians, and now it's in our films. The fact is that many of these techniques have been appropriated into what we do every day as editors, right here in Hollywood, California, making action pictures. Because we are also trying to get a response from the audience. We are also trying to get them to rise out of their seats, rise out of their complacency, but not necessarily for revolutionary purposes, but just to really have a great time in the movies.
Editing techniques the Soviets used to convert their population to communism now drive Hollywood's action blockbusters.
Where's the shot?
What shot?
Took out the shot.
Which shot is that?
The money shot! Bus driver's head, the brains on the window shot, the viscera on the visor shot.
Davis, we thought we'd show it to you like this, you know, without all the...
Put it back! Don't show me anything.
You don't need it. But you're not even giving it a chance.
How's the rearview mirror gag supposed to work without it? Am I the only one here who respects the writing?
You've got suspense and you've got action, and I've found a good combination in the 2 Terminator films was to have a suspenseful build-up to an action release. In Terminator 2, you have a slow, tense build-up of these characters moving around, closing in on the young John Connor, and then he sees the Terminator for the first time, and it's all in slow motion. I like to use the slow motion in the build-up, where it has this kind of protracted, dreamlike or nightmarish quality, and then there's a cathartic break, and then it kicks into gear.
Get down.
chase, something is going right or something is going wrong, and you want to accentuate that. Rhythm is one of the ways you do that. You also want to create peaks and valleys in terms of rhythm.
Chases are a wonderful thing to work on as an editor. I wouldn't want to do them as a steady diet, but every now and then it's great fun. My favorite chase that I've ever worked on, actually, was the canal chase, as we called it, in Terminator 2.
Our ancestors were survivors, therefore we're here. And so there's something plugged into our reptilian hindbrain that makes us relate to the idea of being pursued and getting away. So we get to go through these kind of cathartic simulator runs when we watch a movie, and we get to experience that heart-pounding fear of being chased.
It's a natural form of excitement. Editing can hone that, sharpen that. The tempo of the cuts, the variety of shots that are used, the changing image sizes of characters, reactions, eyes. All these things are in the palette. By manipulation and juxtaposition, you can increase the excitement.
This is the first thing in that I'm standing up, which allows me a considerable amount of freedom of movement, and it also means that I'm sprung. I guess is the only word for it. And frequently when I'm looking at the cut, I will stand here with my hand on the controls, almost like a gunslinger, and trying to hit the point of the cut with my knees bent. And somehow this is important for me because it allows me to internalize the rhythms, the visual rhythms of what's happening. At this point, we've started with a blank slate. So the question is, what are we going to start with? That looks like a good possibility. It establishes things. So there's Anthony saying action, and they start to come forward. We could begin it anywhere in here, but see, there now somebody falls right here, and that's good. Falling is good. We will edit this shot into the timeline. And there it is. In the end, there will be probably 5,000 shots in the film, and all of them have to be ultimately be the right shot in the right place for the right length of time.
When I was watching Nosferatu when I was a kid, our main guy is up in the castle and night has fallen and we're very suspicious something's about to happen, and we see Nosferatu down the hall. That section is what scared me the most, and in terms of editing, it caught my attention because of this. We saw this vampire with pointy teeth and scary eyes very far away down a hallway. And then we cut to our guy, and he's very scared. And we cut back, he's 6 feet away from us. He's just on the other side of the door. And every time I saw it, I was very, very scared. And I remember waiting for that moment of being surprised.
When people come into a theater, they're already keenly aware of their own fears. It's like, let's gather around the campfire and listen to the shaman talk. The screen being the fire. We'll sit in a circle, we'll be in the darkness, we'll be in a dreamlike state, we'll be connected to strangers in a way that we're normally not in the rest of our culture, and we'll feel things in unison. Well, the opening sequence of Scream is almost a film in itself. It is kind of whacking the audience upside the head in 15 minutes, where you introduce a character, develop her, endear her to the audience, and then kill her unexpectedly. That's a matter of yourself and your editor sitting there and thinking, what is that audience, that phantom audience that you're imagining in your mind thinking? It's all judgment calls. It's all about rhythm. It's all about getting that part of it right so that there's no moment where they feel quite easy, no moment where they feel they can know exactly what's coming next. Hitchcock was one of the first directors I was aware of as a kid. When Psycho came out, It caused a buzz in the neighborhood among the parents. And I remember my mother saying, "Oh, it's this horrible old man, he makes these horrible movies." I just said, "Really?" But it was a sense of the totally forbidden and somebody who had crossed the line. So later when I saw his films, there was a kind of delight of seeing this kind of savage wit, if you will, that beneath in Hitchcock's case, especially the very urbane, sophisticated, civilized veneer was this kind of feral, quick animal that knew exactly where the jugular was and kind of delighted in the taste of the blood.
Hitchcock was the master of suspense. Jonathan Demme was devoted to Hitchcock, and his influence can clearly be seen in Silence of the Lambs. Suspense is really an expression of fear. We can build that in our storytelling by withholding information. Frankly, it's a manipulation, but in using that manipulation, it also empowers the story. Not knowing where we're going to go next is the thing that human beings hate the most. We would all like to know where we're going, if it's going to be all right. My editing process is an intuitive process. It's what feels truthful, it's what feels strong, and it's what works. You know, you hear this from a lot of editors. I mean, Dee Allen always used to say to me, you know, I cut with my gut, and she's right.
There's a mismatch here, and I'm going to have to determine whether this is a problem or not, because Brown is looking toward camera, but when we cut, he's looking up off to the left. We can have Jeremy come in and cut so that Jeremy's head is masking Brown's head, so that the mismatch is not seen. And now I'm going to mark this frame, and I'm going to get rid of this area, which is 1, 2, 3 frames. And now I'm going to look at it in context and see how it looks. Good. You have to have the personality that enjoys that it's almost like making little pieces of jewelry, that patience of the individual shots and how they're crafted together. But at the same time, you have to have an appreciation for the larger picture and how these shots fit into the larger picture of the scene, and then how the scene fits into the larger picture of the sequence, and how the sequence fits together with the larger picture of the whole work, and then how the work fits together with society. So it's a boxes within boxes within boxes.
In the 1930s, movies became an even bigger business. The movie studios introduced sound films and radically reshaped movie making. Hollywood retooled itself on the model of the factory assembly line. The studios cranked out movies with almost the same speed that Henry Ford mass-produced cars. I don't want it good, Jack Warner declared. I want it Tuesday.
You now needed an industrial system to make this all work. In the first 20, 25, 30 years of cinema, large numbers of editors were women. It was considered to be a woman's job because it was something like knitting, it was something like tapestry, sewing, that you took these pieces of fabric, which is what film are, and you put them together. It was when sound came in that the men began to infiltrate the ranks of the editors because sound was somehow electrical. It was technical. It was no longer knitting.
There is the soundtrack, which might be several tracks, and the image. And without the happy marriage of those two, you're not using every bit of potential that you possibly can in editing a movie.
The scene in Horse Whisperer where Sam Neill and Kristen Scott Thomas there's an argument results because she's going to leave. The intent of the scene was to show that the marriage was foundering. And it was dialogue basically overlapping as they were speaking, so they were both mic'd. To make it even more dramatic, I even took out more air and made the overlaps more intense. I could do that because I had separate tracks to work with.
Are you a psychiatrist? He says it takes time.
Well, I don't care what he says. I cannot sit here and pretend everything's going to be all right.
I am
we
not
have to
pretending.
Do something.
I am trusting in
we
people who
are
know more about
losing,
this than we do.
We are losing her.
In effect, by taking out all of the air in that particular dialogue scene, it did have kind of a suffocating effect because there was no respite. There was no air there. You couldn't take it. You couldn't draw a breath, and it became that much more intense because of it.
To me, sound is very important. I create a sound template that is both with sound effects and temporary music that evokes certain feeling. I've worked with Per Hallberg as a sound designer and with Ridley Scott. For example, in Black Hawk Down, the incursion of the Black Hawks entering into Mogadishu. It was almost like a ballet, a science fiction ballet. People landing on a different planet. I was not interested in hearing all the helicopters, only music, showing it from a subjective point of view. So this idea of science fiction, when I was putting the scene together, just inspired me to use almost no sound. I remember that the real Black Hawk pilots wanted to see the footage. So one day I just showed them an assembly. They were really moved. One guy, almost tear in his eyes, says, "Man, I don't know, this looks great. I got goosebumps." These were the guys that were there, you know, and it felt real to them.
There was a scene in Dante's Peak where Pierce Brosnan has to walk back through a long tunnel to his truck, and the tunnel is about to collapse. And you hear the sound, the little sound of sand, like falling down the walls. So at one point, the music editor asked me for the scene, and she proceeded to put music on it. And I looked at it, and I said, oh, that doesn't work at all. Because suddenly I'm hearing music and I'm not hearing all that stuff, that tiny little sand thing that makes me scared. If you were in a really dangerous situation, your ears would be so open and hearing every little tiny, tiny sound. If it just has music smooshed over it, you know, it takes away that sense of listening with all your might. I mean, if I were the character, I'd say, turn that off, I can't hear.
The advent of sound expanded the editor's role in Hollywood. During the 30s and 40s, directors rarely came into the cutting room. The editing was controlled by the studios and their supervising editors. One of the most powerful was Margaret Booth, supervising editor at MGM for 30 years. Mastering the transition to sound, she caught the attention of legendary producer Irving Thalberg, who was the first to call cutters film editors, starting with Booth herself.
She oversaw all the production and had a say in almost everyone. But Maggie was probably the toughest and most feared woman at MGM. I mean, people would shudder when they hear that she was on the phone or she'd bust into the editing room, or you'd get a call, come down to room F, which is her room. You think, oh, God, what have I done now? Margaret would tell the others, it's your responsibility for the pace of the movie. It's your responsibility to get the best performances out of your actors. It's your responsibility to make it as good as you can. Margaret Booth, she used to say, if I feel there's a cut at a certain spot, whether it matches or not, cut. And you cut, he says, for the emotion. And if you will get away with so much by doing that. And I would hear her really yell at different editors who would say, oh, it doesn't match. She said, I don't care, you know, cut.
Booth, like other great studio editors of the era, helped create many of the stars of the golden age of Hollywood. Editors today are still doing the same.
We totally control the performance of an actor in the cutting room, actually. A lot of them won't admit that.
Most actors learn very early on that the editor is the one to make friends with, because their performance depends a great deal on the editor and the taste and the talent of the editor.
We'll see dailies, and take 5 is spectacular. It is great, but there's also something wonderful in take 7 and take 4 and take 3. Sometimes those and an actor will see it on screen and say, wow, that was terrific. You used take 5. They don't know, they don't realize that you are borrowing from every single performance. And the editor is the person who's responsible for finding those moments in each performance.
You talk about basic instinct. I think to a large degree the great performance that Sharon is giving there is also constructed by Frank. He spent an enormous amount of time in selecting every part of every take that he felt was important.
In cutting the interrogation sequence, using the basic scenes that were back and forth from the dialogue, the scene would be fairly dull.
What are you going to do?
I had to create her looks and his looks. They were manufactured. They weren't really shot that way. I would take a piece of Michael looking at her from a different part of the scene and a piece of her looking at him from a different part of the scene.
I don't make any rules, Nick. I go with the flow.
Sharon asked if she could see it, and I said, yeah, it's done.
And Sharon came upstairs and said, you must remove that scene. And I said, what scene? And she said, you know the scene in the interrogation.
But they were